Hello and welcome to our newest episode of Startup Heroes. I'm Chris Wood.
I'm Michael Artizabal.
And I'm Nate Tucker.
Today we decided it would be fun to talk about some of our favorite and most impactful books that we've read over the last few years or even decade, because we're old now. But we each have three of our favorite books. The first one we're going to talk about is one that changed our mindset or philosophy, or just kind of made us think about the world differently. The second one is going to be one that kind of solidified the path that we want to travel down. For some of us, it was maybe a on-paper version of what we already felt, but it made it feel more solid and real. For others, it might be, it painted a picture of what you could become. And then the final one is going to be more tactical oriented. So things that gave us actual tools or ideas for things we can actually do instead of just the concept or philosophy. I can start. For anyone that's met me, you already know the answer. It's Start With Why by Simon Sinek.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's crazy. I read this book in college I feel like randomly. I don't think it was assigned to me. Maybe my old boss told me to read it, but I mean, he has the TED Talk about Start With Why, where he draws three circles within each other. Most businesses start with the outside circle, which is what, and then it goes to how, and then why in the middle. And he says the most successful businesses and leaders start in the middle and move out. So they start with why. His example he gives is back in the day, kind of the Microsoft versus Apple dynamic, where Microsoft was very much like, hey, we're a computer company. We sell computers. They do this thing. Do you want to buy one? And Apple was very much like, hey, we're a company that drives innovation. We try and beat ourselves. We try and be better. We are constantly pushing the envelope of technology. When we happen to sell computers, do you want to buy one? And just the dynamic of difference there. Talks about the Wright brothers and other people like that. And it just is a philosophy that's really stuck with me the entire time. It's become a meme within our group at this point, and how much I talk about starting with why. But everything we do when we're confused and we're like, this feels weird to get to the next step, the question that comes out of all of our mouths is, okay, what's our why with this? Why does it exist? What are we trying to do with it? And why are we even trying to make this happen right now? If we can't answer that, we probably shouldn't do it, or it means that we haven't actually figured out the purpose of it. And then that usually gets nice movement towards where we want to go. There's also a follow-up book called Find Your Why, which is a half workbook, half reading book. I mean, it's a really cool supplement to finish the Start With Why ideology, and it helps you find your own why, or your tribe's why, or your company's why. Yeah, it's a really, really cool book, and I highly suggest it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I read it and watched the TED Talk a long time ago and found it really impactful. But since being around Chris and using it all the time, like asking that guiding question of, we really are stuck in a meeting, what's the why? It's honestly very helpful. So for my mindset book, it's a book called The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And it is a book that is essentially like, what if you took the 80-20 rule, which if you're not familiar with, it's like 20% of the efforts, the inputs get you 80% of the results. What if you took the 80-20 rule and then you did it again and again and again until all you had left was one thing? So essentially this is the guiding question. What's the one thing that you can do that because you do it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? And so often I'll adapt that question to whatever the thing at hand is. So it's like, I'm facing this issue with working out. And so I'll ask, okay, what's the one thing I can do to make working out way easier and much more likely to happen? And then that at least gets the ball rolling on starting to think of like high impact actions that could actually change things. And so it's honestly really helped me solidify cause and effect in my brain and apply that to the next bottleneck in business, in life, in creativity. And so it's constantly like, why is one of the questions rattling around in my head? And the other one is, hey, we're doing a bunch of small things that aren't moving the needle. Is there something that we can do that will blow this out of the water, essentially?
That's awesome, Michael. So my book is The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, and it very much is modeled on the idea of being a book for artists who are experiencing a lack of creativity, or maybe they often are getting stumped in their creative pursuits. And while that's the main focus, I think it really could be applicable to just about anyone, because the main point of the book is to help you find ways to overcome mental obstacles. And it does that through like great exercises and tips for like training your mindset and adjusting how you think about like your mental energy and stuff like that. So I really recommend it to anyone who's just like in a position where they have to create things and use their brain a lot, and ever has those moments of like, I just don't have the energy for this, or I feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again. It can really help you like overcome those stumps.
I feel like those read in conjunction with each other would be really powerful too.
Yeah.
Especially like with the one thing, kind of starting with what is my why, and then once you know that, figuring out what is the one thing based on my why that could be impactful. And when you hit a barrier or roadblock, using the artist's way to kind of train yourself on how to get around those and to build it out.
Yeah, absolutely. It has a lot of like great tools that I could see kind of like collaborating with that. And even I think Michael might even kind of be using, even if he doesn't realize it. Like it talks about concepts like the morning pages, which is the idea of just like writing down every day when you start your day, just writing and spending time being creative, because a lot of times, you know, when you first wake up is when you have your most like mental power. So it's good to go and get a jump on that. And a lot of times that's also where you can most easily kind of confront those issues that you're facing, because you don't have other things, you know, the day hasn't really started and isn't like messing with your head. It talks about the idea of like artist dates, which I love, which is the idea of like, go do things that might initially feel unproductive just because they make you happy. And that's where you get your inspiration and really have those like, you know, moments of joy that help you keep going with your creative pursuits.
Do you have an example of one that you do that's an artist date?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say a lot of my little day trips, especially like going out hiking and things like that, it's very stereotypical to say, you know, the outdoors helps you be more creative, but it does. It just fully does. I think an example is just going out. You know, if you have that thing in your head of like, man, I heard about this fun place, but I never go there because, you know, that would take up time, or I don't have like a reason to go there. Just go do it. Cause yeah, it very much, it's like you're taking yourself on a date, you know, you don't have to go in with like an objective. The objective is just have a good time.
As they used to say, YOLO.
Exactly. Yeah.
I had a fun artist date the other day that I did at home. And it was, I decided that, you know, it was the day I had work and everything. So, but I was like, hey, before work and after work, my goal today is to binge watch Blue-Eyed Samurai, because I just really wanted to watch that show, and I just decided I'm gonna let myself watch that show. And honestly, I still feel some of the energy from that day, and it was weeks ago.
That's awesome.
That's epic. All right, book number 2. This is path-oriented solidification of ideologies. Mine was Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. I read it probably a year ago-ish, would you all say?
Yeah.
Something like that. And it was like crack for my brain. I could not put it down. It was awesome. Every page I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool and just interesting and really cool ideas. And the basic concept is, so Will Guidara took over a restaurant with a chef, and it was the 11 Madison Garden restaurant, very well-known, famous restaurant in New York City. They eventually got onto the top 50 restaurants in the world lists. And when they went to the award ceremony, they got number 50. And they didn't know that there were cameras there. And so they like were kind of upset and shocked, and the cameras were on their face, and they didn't realize it until after that. And they're like, and they tried to play it off, but they couldn't. So they went home and they were like, man, we should have been higher than that. And then they started thinking about, okay, what are the restaurants that are in the top 5, 10, and why are they there? And they realized it's because they aren't just good restaurants, but they had an impact on the industry and like on how people do things. One was the one that introduced the concept of like micro foods and kind of the micro greenery on the plates and garnishing, just stuff like that, like farm to table, the ones that kind of introduced that concept really heavily in the last couple of decades. So they decided to double down on their hospitality, and it came about because of a lot of things, but the story that really sticks out and kind of made them double and triple down on this was he overheard a table that was full of a bunch of foodies, and they had kind of hit all of the highlights in New York City, but they were lamenting the fact that they didn't get to have a gross water hot dog from New York. And so he heard this, and then he went to the nearest hot dog stand, bought a couple of the gross, yummy, delicious, terrible hot dogs, and gave them to a chef and said, hey, plate these for me. And the guy was like, no, absolutely not. He's like, no, trust me, plate these. So the guy plated them like majestically, like beautifully with all that cool stuff. And he brought them out, and you would have thought that they had just won the World Series with how excited they were and how just impactful it was for them. They'd had caviar, they'd had lobster, they'd had steak, but the dirty water hot dogs were the best because he listened to what they wanted and made it happen. So the restaurant ends up building out this it's called a dream weaver position, where the people's sole job is to figure out what people want and what they like and just make it happen. They had someone who was there who was supposed to be on their honeymoon, but the plane had gotten canceled. And so they like gave them a tour of the kitchen. When they came back, their table was in the middle of like sand, and like it felt like they were at the beach, which is where their honeymoon was supposed to be. And just stories and examples like that. But so I loved the ideas and the philosophy of Unreasonable Hospitality, but I also loved just thinking about how every day we can make our business and our interactions just that much better and that much more caring and that much more empathetic, and understanding that it doesn't take a lot to make someone's day and make them really happy. It just takes intentionality and listening. And so we've tried to put some of those ideologies and be caffeinated, and it can be applied to anything. And it was just a really cool way to think about how can we actually make people really, really happy. And the idea of it's not one size fits all, it's one size fits one, but it doesn't mean it has to be crazy. It just means it has to be specific and intentional. So.
Love that. Great job, Chris.
Oh, I forgot. And then they became the #1 restaurant in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Spoilers, but not really, because of their hospitality.
Yeah.
And then one more story, and then I'll let you go. They realized one of the worst things in a restaurant is walking in and the server being like, "What's your name? What's your reservation?" So they got rid of the hosting podium. And instead, when you walk in, there's a person that greets you by name. And it's because there's someone in the back that the person can see, but the customers can't see, that sign language tells them what the person walking in's name is, because they've researched it and found them online. And then, so like you walk in and you're like, "Oh, hello, Christopher, welcome in." And they lead you to your seat and they have all this crazy stuff. And they created hand gestures and like lane signals for the waiters to walk through the restaurant. And if someone is like needing help, they do something to their lapel. They never yell. It's all this crazy stuff that they built out just to make the experience that much better and remove all of the bad stuff. So anyways, really, really cool.
If you want to see some of the ideas of this in action, you should first off just watch The Bear season 1, but season 2 in particular, they take a lot of inspiration.
7?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. You'll know when you get there. For me, my path book, the book that kind of really helped me a lot was, I've always been a creative person. I've always been interested in business, but I've never, not until the last few years of my life, did I have other business people in my life. So I didn't have a lot of the education. I did not have a lot of the context. And when I read The Startup J-Curve, I felt like everything made sense. It showed me there's a lot of business books I read before that gave me a little snippet of, this is how you do like quick iterations on things. And this is what you do if you're trying to market. And this is what you do if you're trying to come up with ideas. But there was never like when you walk into the mall and you're like, "Where am I? I'm trying to find the right store." And then you see that little directory that shows you are here. That is what the Startup J-Curve is to me, is a way of looking at business and saying, where am I in this journey? What do I need to think about at the right times? And that honestly, just knowing that structure existed gave me the path forward to say like, I can make my creative stuff happen. I just have to follow the path. I can make my business stuff happen. I can just follow the path. I'm going to use this structure for the rest of my life with everything I ever do. So it's a great book. I highly recommend it.
So for me, this is a very interesting one. It feels like it would be Trust Me, I'm Lying. So I read this book whenever I was in college and first really started studying marketing, because I kind of felt frustrated with the classes I was taking, to be very honest, because a lot of them were very focused on like the overarching focus of like, consumer behavior and things like that. And those felt useful, but they didn't feel very relevant. Because, I wanted to learn about social media marketing. I wanted to learn about like the nitty gritty of how I get people to care about products. And this book is incredible because it basically just goes through all these different kind of like hacks in the marketing world of how people market things. Some of them are not stated the best, as in like they might be like topics that might feel a little like sleazy and a little like, we're going to market this at any cost. But the point of it is it really gets you into that like guerrilla mindset of like, okay, this is what marketing can look like. Or, this is how not to market and things like that. It really set me on like this new path of like how I think about marketing and how I think about like reach and like the angle of like guerrilla marketing, because that's just stuff that never got brought up in my classes.
All right. And the final books are tactical or things that you can kind of use or utilize. So mine, there's a lot of them, but the one that sticks out really strongly is Radical Candor by Kim Scott. It's basically, the concept is how to speak directly to your employees or those on your team while also letting them know that you care about them. And it's about, for those that know me as well, I'm not good at being mean, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can definitely bite you in the butt if you're a business person. And it took a while and a lot of heartache to understand that sometimes being, quote, nice, end quote, is actually being honest and saying the things that are hard. And sometimes it's actually mean to not be honest and say the hard things. So reading this book really opened my eyes to how to have those hard conversations and to make it okay. And it's basically that you lead with empathy and you have built the rapport with your people to where they know you're not saying something to be malicious or to attack them, but rather to help them get where they want to go and where you want the team to go. And I feel like that's a commonly missed step for when people want to be honest with people, is they don't have that rapport already. I think especially with newer hires or people that you haven't had these conversations with before, if you just jump into it, it can be kind of jarring and taken poorly. But if instead you've already built up that relationship and the rapport with them where they know, oh, he's saying this or she's saying this because they want what's best for me, or they know that I can do better, or whatever the case may be, then an actual conversation can be had instead of just like, hey, you suck, don't say that. But the example that Kim Scott gives is she gave a presentation some point early in one of her careers, and she thought she did really well. And afterwards she was walking with her boss, and her boss was like, hey, you said too many times, people won't take you seriously if you do that. And Kim was like offended and mad and upset that she wasn't complimented. And then she thought about it and she was like, they weren't saying that to be mean. They're saying that because they know I can do better. They know I want to be taken seriously. And they know that if I improve that, then I will get there. And so that's kind of the philosophy of the book. And it has really good examples on how to build that up and make that a priority with your team.
Awesome. That's a huge skill for sure. For me, mine is a book called The Road Less Stupid. So I'm sorry it's an offensive book title, but it's really, really powerful. It's very impactful. Every single chapter has a different concept that's important to you, how to think like a CEO, essentially. Even if you're not the CEO and you're just doing a solo project or you're an employee, it doesn't matter. Like, it helps you think like a person that makes decisions. And at the end of each chapter, there are what he calls thinking time questions that are relevant to that topic. And so there's so many different topics covered through business that if I'm ever stuck, I can go back to that book, find that topic, look up the questions. And after journaling on them, I probably will have, if not the solution, at least a pathway forward of potential solutions that I can try out. In particular, there's a thing in this book called The Big 8, which is essentially how to structure a full cycle of work with your team. That essentially the CEO's goal is to see where the vision is, identify what the bottleneck is, and then empower the team to come up with the plan and the machine and the rubric for how to destroy that bottleneck and move the business forward. And then it's the CEO's goal to come back on the back end and make sure, hey, did things happen the way you said they were going to happen? Did it get the results we were hoping to get? So that then you can do the cycle all over again. And it's really fantastic.
Sounds a lot like Scrum.
Very similar, yeah.
That's interesting. That's cool.
Yeah, so that's just one of many. I could keep going and going, but it is a really great book, The Road Less Stupid.
Yeah, so for my tactical one, it would be a recent one that I read, which is Think Like a Game Designer. It's actually a gift from Chris when I was actually working on my own board game, and I've really appreciated this book. While it is focused on the idea of like the steps you go through to create a game, at the heart of it, it's really a book about constructing engines for like workflow. So it's been very helpful for like other projects that I work on, like big ambitious goals I have with my marketing and with like side projects like the Green Ice Festival, to be able to kind of go like, okay, what do I need to do to kind of like keep this going? Where are like the steps that I need to break down, and creating the flow of like, what are my loops of like work and how they do those operate. So yeah, I really recommend it.
Nice.
And then I have a bonus book that we have talked about a lot on here. It's called The Lean Startup. And if you go back pretty far on our podcast, let's see, maybe like about a year ago, we did a series on the Lean Startup where we talk about the Lean Canvas model, which is basically a one-page business plan where if you understand the 9 different elements of the Lean Canvas, then you really understand your business. We added 2 extras as well. One is starting with your why, and one is financial forecasting. But yeah, so you can go back to our podcast if you haven't listened to it before, and we break down each of those and make it really easy to understand. We give examples both personally that we've gone through, and on, I think we just had like a general business that we used as an example, which was just like a coffee shop or something. Yeah. So that's another book that you can read, and it's really known as the kind of entrepreneurship 101 book because it just does a really good job at shotgun teaching all of the business stuff. And yeah, so that kind of sums up all of our books today. We are going to have a blog post up about it with affiliate links to the books that we've talked about, and we'll have a link to that blog on our next Business Buzz newsletter. If you're not on our newsletter list, please sign up for it. It comes out every Monday morning. You can sign up for it at hivethinkmedia.com, and all you have to do is put in an email and just read the stuff. We have a HiveThink tip, tool, trade,
tip, tool, trend, and a hot take from the world of business and marketing.
I know it's 4 T's, and that's about as far as I can get. But yeah, so that's been us. Thanks so much for listening. And also go and follow us on Coffee Break Chattanooga on Instagram, because we've created a community-oriented, quote, networking event that's all about building a stronger community and building each other up together. We meet on the second Friday of every month, and it's a really good time. You can find us on Instagram or at happycoffeebreak.com. This has been Chris Wood,
Michael Artizabal,
Nate Tucker.
Have a happy day, and thanks for thinking with us.